The wind howled across the moors as Clara Moorfield stood before the ancient gates of Moorfield Manor. Her eyes traced the silhouette of the looming house through the thick fog. The mansion seemed to rise from the earth itself, its spires jagged against the darkening sky. Despite the unease gnawing at her, Clara stepped forward, dragging her suitcase behind her, the gravel path crunching under her feet. The house had been left to her by her great Uncle Simon, whom she'd never known well, but had learned enough to know he was a reclusive man, someone who had cut ties with the world, keeping only the barest of connections. His letter had been strangely formal, yet insistent, requesting her presence at the manor to claim what is yours. The gates groaned as Clara pushed them open. She glanced back at the taxi, its headlights already fading into the mist as it turned and disappeared down the long, winding road. The manor stood ahead, silent and imposing. The door, weathered by age, creaked open without anyone touching it as she approached. She hesitated for only a moment, but then, drawn by some unseen force, Clara crossed the threshold into the darkness beyond. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood, mold, and something faintly metallic seemed to cling to the walls. The silence was overwhelming, and yet there was a heaviness in the air that made it feel as though the house itself was breathing. The portraits on the walls, old, faded images of stern-looking men and women, seemed to follow her every move. Their eyes were cold, distant, as if they had witnessed things the world was never meant to see. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, was an unsettling presence. She was small, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent, and her movements were deliberate but unnatural, as if she already knew every inch of the manor and its secrets. She barely spoke, guiding Clara through the hallways without a word. Her eyes flickered from one room to another, as though watching something just out of Clara's sight. When Clara reached the upstairs hall, her eyes were drawn to a portrait at the far end, a man with wild, untamed hair and a twisted grin that sent a shiver down her spine. His eyes, though painted, seemed alive, piercing her with an intensity that made her stomach turn. She stared at him for a moment, her heart quickening before Mrs. Calloway's voice broke the stillness. "One of your ancestors." The housekeeper muttered, "Don't mind him, he's always been troublesome." Clara nodded, uneasy, as she moved past the painting toward the room that had been prepared for her, but she could feel the man's gaze still upon her, his unsettling smile carved into her mind. The room was dark and cold, with heavy curtains drawn across the windows. A large, ornate bed sat in the center, its wooden frame carved with intricate patterns, though some of the carvings seemed almost alive, shifting if she stared too long. She set her suitcase down beside the bed, unsure of what she felt, fear or fascination, or perhaps something in between. Later that evening, Clara wandered through the manor, unable to sleep. The house was vast, its halls long and winding, filled with relics of the past. Old books lined the shelves in one of the studies, their spines cracked and faded. It was there, buried beneath piles of forgotten papers, that she found the journal. The leather cover was cracked, its edges worn from years of neglect. As Clara opened it, she found that the pages inside were yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was erratic, as if the writer had been consumed by something. A madness, perhaps. The first entry was dated 1824. "I have begun the work that was meant to be done. The boundaries of the human mind are thin, fragile, but with the right tools they can be expanded, manipulated, reshaped." The words sent a cold chill down her spine. She flipped through the pages, reading more, her pulse quickening. The entries became increasingly frantic, the handwriting more scrawled, as if the writer was losing control. The mind must be freed from its fleshly prison. The body is nothing. The mind is everything. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she read the next passage. "I have made progress with the family. They do not understand. They fear what I am doing to them, but they do not know what lies beyond the veil. The transformation has begun." The final line sent a jolt of terror through her. "The Moorfields will never be free of this curse. It is in their blood. It is in their veins. Suddenly, Clara was aware of a soft whisper just on the edge of hearing. It was faint at first, like a murmur in the wind, but as she scanned the room, she saw nothing. She slammed the journal shut and stood, her heart racing. The whispers grew louder, but still there was no one in sight. She turned quickly, as if expecting someone to be standing just behind her, but the room was empty. A sudden coldness washed over her, seeping into her bones. She felt like something, no, someone, was in the room with her, and that's when she saw it. In the far corner of the room, a door, previously hidden behind a large bookshelf, stood ajar. Clara couldn't remember it being there before, and curiosity tugged at her. What was behind that door? She moved toward it, her footsteps echoing through the silence. Inside the room, she found relic, ancient books bound in cracked leather, symbols scrawled on the walls, and an ornate mirror that stretched from floor to ceiling. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the weight of centuries of secrets. Clara stepped closer to the mirror, her reflection distorted in its tarnished surface. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the glass. The reflection shimmered, shifting unnaturally, and Clara gasped as her image changed. Her skin seemed to age before her eyes, her hair turning silver, her face cracked and hollow. She stepped back, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The mirror felt alive, like it was pulling her in, showing her something she wasn't supposed to see. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, deep and guttural. "You are one of us now. The blood runs through your veins." Clara recoiled, her heart racing. She stumbled backward, tripping over her feet, but the voice kept reverberating in her ears. She tried to run, but the door slammed shut behind her with a force that made the entire room shake. The whispers returned, louder now, almost frantic. "You cannot escape." Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle, but the door refused to budge. She was trapped. Clara couldn't shake the unease that had settled within her after the encounter in the mirror. The house seemed to have changed overnight, the shadows longer, the silence heavier, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her to discover something she wasn't meant to know. That night she found herself back in the study, flicking through the decaying pages of the journals, searching for answers. The letter from her great Uncle Simon had promised nothing but legal formalities and financial obligations, but it was clear now that the inheritance was something far more sinister. Her hands trembled as she turned the brittle pages, desperate to piece together the fractured remnants of her family's past. At first, it was Elias Moorfield who drew her in. His journals were filled with references to obscure rituals, arcane symbols, and experiments that blurred the line between science and the occult. As Clara read more, the words began to make a horrible kind of sense, like an ancient curse laid over generations. The Moorfields had always been haunted, not by ghosts, but by something much worse. The entry that stood out most was dated June 19, 1857, written in a frenzied scrawl. "I have finally found it, the Crimson Doctrine. It was hidden within the Bloodline all along. The doctrine speaks of the great transformation, the key to immortality. To understand the mind is to control it. To manipulate the soul is to set it free. The Moorfields are the keepers of this secret. And we must unlock the doors to the other side. There is no going back." The words seemed to burn through her vision, and Clara had to put the journal down to steady herself. The Crimson Doctrine. It was a name that resonated through the silence of the manor, a name that would haunt her every step. The doctrine was said to be an ancient set of practices passed down through the Moorfield lineage, focusing on the manipulation of the human psyche and the transcendence of the physical body. Clara couldn't quite understand all of it. Some passages seemed deliberately obfuscated, their meaning hidden behind complex codes and symbols. But the few fragments she could make out suggested that the Moorfields had been experimenting with the very essence of what made them human, their minds, their souls, their blood. As she leafed through more of Elias's writings, Clara began to see the extent of his obsession. He had been conducting horrific experiments, first on patients at a nearby asylum, and then on members of his own family. He believed that madness was the key to breaking through the mortal shell, that by inducing a breakdown of the mind, one could reach a higher plane of existence. Her breath caught in her throat when she came across an entry detailing his first experiment on his own daughter, Margaret Moorfield. Margaret is the key. She is already closed to madness, but she lacks the final piece. I have administered the serum, a mix of rare herbs, blood magic, and distilled fear. The results have been promising. She has become aware of things that should not be. The time has come for her to see the other side. The mind is a fragile thing, but I shall force it to transcend. She will be the first to make the leap, and from her the rest will follow. Clara could hardly stomach the words. It was clear that Elias had viewed his family as nothing more than test subjects, pawns in his sickening game. And from the looks of it, Margaret had been the first victim in what would become a long line of experimentation. But why was this written as if it were a success? Clara's fingers trembled as she turned the page to find another entry dated only a few days later. Margaret has gone beyond. She is no longer here, not in the way she once was. Her body remains, but her mind has shattered. The spirit has left, or perhaps it has entered another realm. The serum worked, but at what cost? She is beyond my reach now. I cannot bring her back, but her path must be followed. The others must follow, for the bloodline cannot survive without it. Clara's hands shook as she closed the journal with a resounding snap. Her mind reeled. Margaret, the first sacrifice, the first sign of the Moorfield family's descent into madness. What had happened to her? Was she still somewhere in the house, lingering in the shadows? Was she one of the whispers Clara had heard in the mirror? Clara needed answers, and she had a feeling that somewhere in this house they waited for her to uncover them. Later that evening, the temperature in the manor seemed to drop. The house creaked with a groan as though it were alive, stretching and shifting in the cold night air. Clara found herself drawn once again to the attic, where the old hidden door had once opened into a forgotten room. This time she went with purpose, the burning need to uncover the truth driving her forward. The door creaked as it opened, revealing the same dark, dusty room she had found before. But this time she was ready. She stepped inside and made her way toward the large, ornate mirror that had so unnerved her the night before. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the cold glass once again. Her reflection stared back at her, but something was different. The image seemed clearer, sharper, as if she were seeing herself for the first time. And yet, in the dim light, her reflection appeared older, wearier. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, seemed clouded, haunted. She blinked, and the reflection blinked with her, but there was something else there now, something darker. The whispering began again, low and distant at first. Clara turned her head, but no one was there. "You cannot escape, you cannot leave." Clara recoiled from the mirror, heart pounding. She felt a sudden pull deep inside her chest, like an invisible force was yanking her forward. For a moment she felt as though she were no longer standing in the attic, but somewhere else, somewhere beyond the physical world. Her vision blurred, the room twisting and warping as the air grew thicker, the whispers louder. She stumbled backward, slamming her back into the wall. The room righted itself again, and the pressure inside her chest eased. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed into a new plane of reality, a place where the boundaries between life and death were blurred. The mirror had shown her something she wasn't meant to see, and now it was calling to her. She felt it deep in her bones, the connection to her ancestors, the pull of the Crimson Doctrine. Something inside her was waking up. The bloodline was stirring, and Clara was not sure she wanted to know what would come next. The night was heavy with silence, but Clara's mind was anything but still. The mirror, the whispering voices, the unsettling history of her ancestors. They all swirled together in a maddening haze. She had hoped that by confronting the manor's secrets, she might find peace or answers. But now, as she stood in the attic with the door closed behind her, she realized that uncovering the truth might come at a far greater cost than she had ever imagined. As the days passed, the house seemed to grow darker, the shadows longer, as if something was feeding on her growing unease. The walls, once cracked but benign, now seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, and every corner of the manor felt haunted, alive with the memories of generations who had long since passed. It wasn't just the house itself, it was the legacy it carried. A legacy of twisted experiments, forbidden rituals, and a bloodline that had never truly been free of the curse Elias had set in motion so long ago. One evening, Clara sat before the fireplace in the drawing room, the only warmth in the otherwise cold manor. She could still hear the whispering, faint but constant, just beneath the crackle of the flames. It was as if the house was speaking to her, beckoning her to understand what had happened here. She ran her fingers over the pages of the journals, seeking more clues, but each one left her with more questions than answers. The insanity that had plagued her ancestors seemed to be spreading, seeping into her own mind, clouding her judgment. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed from the door, snapping Clara from her thoughts. She stood, her hand instinctively reaching for the cold iron handle. Mrs. Calloway stood in the doorway, her face as pale as ever, her eyes shadowed with something that might have been concern. Or was it fear? "You are still awake," Mrs. Calloway said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is something you should see." Clara narrowed her eyes. There was an edge to the housekeeper's words, an urgency that had not been there before. Mrs. Calloway stepped aside, motioning for Clara to follow her. Without a word, Clara obeyed, her heart beating faster as she followed the thin, hunched woman down the long corridors of the manor. The house seemed quieter than usual, the silence pressing in on her as though the very walls were watching, listening. They descended into the lower levels of the manor, a part Clara hadn't yet explored. The stone walls grew damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. At the far end of a narrow hallway, Mrs. Calloway stopped before a small door, its wood scarred with age. This, Mrs. Calloway murmured, was where it all began. Clara's breath hitched in her chest. She had seen the door before. Its existence was a part of the rumors that had followed her family for generations. But now, standing before it, Clara could feel an almost magnetic pull toward it. Mrs. Calloway unlocked the door with a heavy iron key, and the door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, an altar stood in the center, ancient and covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. Around the altar were symbols, unfamiliar sigils and markings that seemed to shift under her gaze. The air was thick with a strange energy, and the temperature in the room dropped drastically, the chill seeping into her bones. As Clara stepped forward, her eyes fell on something on the altar, a book, its leather cover cracked and worn, its pages yellowed with age, lay open in the center. Mrs. Calloway stepped aside, motioning for Clara to approach. The book was the same one she had seen earlier, but its pages were filled with more than just Elias's cryptic ramblings. The Crimson Doctrine had a darker, more dangerous side to it, a side that Clara was only beginning to understand. She reached for the book, but the moment her fingers brushed against its surface, a violent surge of energy coursed through her body. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she was no longer standing in the room. She was standing in the past, walking through the corridors of the manor, hearing the voices of her ancestors as though they were speaking to her from beyond the veil. "The mind is fragile," a voice whispered, faint but clear. "And yet it is the gateway to all power. Clara's heart raced as she looked around. The walls of the manor seemed to bend and twist, distorting her vision. Figures appeared, shadows with form, walking through the house. They were her ancestors, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted with madness. She saw Elias, his face contorted with obsession, speaking to someone, perhaps Margaret or another victim of his experiments. They must understand. Elias's voice echoed in her mind. The bloodline must be preserved. The transformation must be complete. The vision flickered, and Clara was back in the room, gasping for air. The book was now closed in front of her, its pages empty. She stood there, her mind reeling, the echoes of her ancestors' voices still ringing in her ears. "You have seen it now," Mrs. Calloway said quietly, her eyes filled with something dark, something almost pitiful. "You understand, don't you?" Clara shook her head, unable to speak. The weight of what she had just experienced threatened to crush her. The transformation. Was it something that could be stopped? Had it already begun? The housekeeper stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are the last of the Moorfields, Clara, the last to carry the blood, the transformation. It runs through you too." Clara felt the room close in on her, the walls pressing tighter and tighter as the realization sank in. She wasn't just here to inherit the manor. She was here because the house was calling her, because her family's cursed bloodline was ready to claim her too. Mrs. Calloway took a step back, her eyes darkening. "You can try to fight it, but in the end you will join us. We all do." Clara stumbled back, her hand gripping the cold stone wall for support. Her blood ran cold as she looked at the housekeeper, the truth dawning on her. The Crimson Doctrine was not just a set of rituals, it was a curse, one that her ancestors had passed down through generations, and now it was her turn. The question was no longer if she would succumb to it, but when, and whether there was anything she could do to stop it. Clara's heart pounded as she stumbled away from the secret room. The weight of Mrs. Calloway's words echoed in her mind, each syllable like a hammer striking her skull. The bloodline, the transformation, it runs through you too. She had known deep down that her family's history was tainted, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The truth had been in front of her all along, hidden behind cryptic journals, sealed rooms, and whispering shadows. She had always felt the pull of something dark within the manor, something that had been waiting for her to finally see. But now the lines between past and present, reality and nightmare, were beginning to blur. The hallways of the manor seemed even longer now, the silence suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and every corner she turned felt like another step deeper into the abyss. She could almost hear the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, the whispers from the walls themselves, urging her to continue the family's work, but Clara couldn't. She couldn't be a part of this. She had to find a way to escape, to break free of the bloodline's curse. But each thought of escape was met with a crushing sense of inevitability, a heavy weight on her chest that made it feel impossible to breathe. The voices were already growing louder, more insistent, and every shadow in the corners of her vision seemed to move of its own accord. It wasn't until Clara returned to her room, the door creaking open behind her with an unnatural ease, that she realized the full extent of what was happening. The house was changing her. She could feel it in her bones, the steady pull of the Crimson Doctrine, its dark tendrils wrapping around her thoughts, filling her with a need to understand, to know, to follow where the others had failed. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror again, and this time the reflection was more than just an image. It was a distorted version of herself, her face gaunt and hollow, her eyes wild, glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. Her reflection grinned at her, twisted and mocking. "It's already begun," it whispered. Clara recoiled, slamming her eyes shut and turning away, but the reflection stayed with her, lurking in the dark recesses of her mind. She needed answers. She needed to know what was truly happening to her. Had the transformation already started? Was she losing herself to the madness that had consumed her ancestors? With a trembling hand, she pulled the journal from her suitcase, flicking through the pages once more. The writings of Elias Moorfield and his twisted experiments became more frenzied the deeper she went. There were references to a final ceremony, something that would be performed when the last heir of the Moorfield line came of age. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she came across an entry she had missed before, one that seemed to give an answer to everything. The ceremony will be completed on the eve of the full moon, when the bloodline is strongest. Only then will the true transformation occur. The body will be shed, and the mind will ascend. The vessel will be pure, and the soul will transcend to the other side, where it will no longer be bound by flesh. This is the final step in the Crimson Doctrine. Only one can survive the passage. Clara's hands trembled as she read the words, the final ceremony, the idea of her own transformation into something other than human. She felt her stomach twist, the blood in her veins turning to ice. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't become like them. But even as she told herself that, a strange part of her, the part that had been awakened by the house, by the bloodline, wanted to understand. It wanted to know what it felt like to be freed from the constraints of the body, to see what lay beyond. The whispers in her mind were coaxing her, filling her thoughts with promises of power, of immortality, of escape from the limitations of mortality. The others had wanted it too, hadn't they? Clara slammed the journal shut, her mind spinning with the conflicting thoughts. She couldn't deny the attraction, the pull of the unknown. The house had been built on these ideals, and it was clear now that the bloodline had always been doomed to repeat this cycle. She glanced back at the window, where the moon hung low in the sky, fat, round, and full. The full moon, it was tonight. The timing was too perfect, too inevitable. She had to do something, but what? As the minutes passed, her restlessness grew. She couldn't just sit there, waiting for the inevitable. She had to find a way to break the cycle, to stop the ceremony from happening, to keep herself from becoming one with the madness. She thought back to the hidden room, to the altar. Could she destroy the book? Could she destroy the journal? Could she sever the ties that bound her to her ancestors once and for all? But before she could act, a soft, almost imperceptible knock sounded at the door. Clara's breath hitched. She knew who it was without even needing to look. Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper, had been watching her, following her every move, waiting for the moment when Clara would finally accept her fate. Clara turned toward the door, her mind racing. She had to be strong. She couldn't let the house or its inhabitants have control over her. She had to fight, even if she didn't know how. The truth was, she had no choice now. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Calloway stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She wasn't the old, frail woman Clara had known. There was something different about her now, something almost predatory. Her eyes glinted with something dark, something that wasn't entirely human. "The time has come, Clara," Mrs. Calloway said softly, her voice a low whisper. "The ceremony is tonight. You have no choice. You were always meant for this. Your bloodline demands it." Clara's pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. "I'm not like them," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I won't be. I refuse to let you control me." The housekeeper's lips curled into a slow, almost pitying smile. "You already are, Clara. The blood runs too deep. There's no escaping it." Clara clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll fight it. I'll find a way to destroy it, to stop it. I'll stop all of you." Mrs. Calloway stepped aside, her expression unchanged. "You'll see, child, in the end there is no escaping the blood. It has always been here. It always will be." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the dark room, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The full moon rose higher in the sky, and Clara knew the moment was approaching. Her bloodline's legacy was calling her, but she was determined. She would not let it claim her. The battle for her soul had begun. The moon hung heavy in the night sky, its silver light casting an eerie glow over the manor. Clara stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out into the darkness. The weight of the night pressed on her chest, and the shadows of the manor seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if they were alive, reaching toward her. Tonight was the night, the ceremony, the transformation. It was all happening now. Every fiber of her being screamed for escape, for action. But each step she took toward defiance felt like an impossible climb, as though the house itself were pulling her back. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and the reflection in the mirror, her own face, seemed to grin at her in a way that sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice deep and mocking. "You belong to the bloodline, it is in your veins." Clara shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts from her mind. She had to focus, she had to find a way to stop what was coming. Earlier that evening, she had searched the manor for any clue that might help her undo the legacy she had inherited. But everything she found, the sealed rooms, the hidden altars, the ancient rituals, only drove her deeper into despair. There was no easy answer. The ceremony had been planned for centuries, and all her ancestors, from Elias Moorfield down to the present day, had walked the same path. Their madness had been her inheritance, and now it was her turn to face it. A soft knock sounded at her door. Clara froze. She knew who it was. Mrs. Calloway. The housekeeper had been the constant shadow at her heels, and now it seemed she had come to claim her. "Clara, Mrs. Calloway's voice echoed through the door, soft and low. "It's time." Clara's heart raced, but she refused to let fear consume her. This was the moment, the final moment. She had to confront whatever was waiting for her, even if it meant destroying the last remnants of the Moorfield legacy. With trembling hands, Clara opened the door. Mrs. Calloway stood in the hallway, her posture straight, her eyes gleaming with something dark, something that was not entirely human. "You're ready, I see, Mrs." Calloway murmured, her voice almost affectionate. "The bloodline calls to you. Your ancestors are waiting." Clara's stomach twisted. She felt the pull of the house, the pull of the bloodline, wrapping tighter around her heart, but she refused to be led by it. "No," Clara said firmly, stepping into the hallway, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I won't be a part of this. I won't become like them." The housekeeper's lips curled into a slow smile, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You don't have a choice, Clara. The blood chooses you, and you are already too far gone to escape." Clara's pulse quickened. She had to act now. The ceremony was close, and if she didn't stop it, everything would be lost. But she needed something, anything, that could stop this cursed cycle from repeating. "Tell me," Clara demanded, stepping closer, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger, "where is the book? Where is the Crimson Doctrine, Mrs.?" Calloway's expression flickered for just a moment, a shadow of something like regret crossing her face. "You don't understand, child. The doctrine is not something that can be destroyed. It lives within the blood. It lives within you. Every Moorfield has come to this moment, and now it is your turn." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Where the altar, Mrs." Calloway said quietly. "It has always been the same place, in the crypt beneath the manor." Clara's eyes widened. The crypt, the place she had always felt drawn to. It was where everything had begun, and it was where it would end. Without another word, Clara turned and rushed down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Mrs. Calloway did not follow, but Clara could feel her presence behind her, an unshakable force, like the house itself, was pushing her forward. As she descended deeper into the manor, the walls seemed to close in around her, and the air grew thicker, colder. The crypt was at the very bottom of the house, beneath the foundations, where the blood of her ancestors had been spilled countless times before. The door to the crypt loomed ahead, ancient and weathered, but it was the only way forward. Clara hesitated for just a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. What if it was too late? What if she had already succumbed to the bloodline, to the madness? But no, she couldn't think that way. She was still Clara Moorfield, and she would not let the legacy of madness define her. With a deep breath, Clara shoved the door open, stepping into the cold, dark crypt. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The stone walls were lined with tombs, each one marking the resting place of a Moorfield who had passed before her, but in the center of the room there was an altar, one she had seen in the visions, one she had read about in the journals. It was stone, worn with age, but the markings on its surface were still fresh, as if they had been etched into the rock only days ago. On the altar, the Crimson Doctrine lay open, its pages worn and yellowed with age, and standing before it, his back to her, was Elias Moorfield. Clara's heart stopped. Her great-grandfather turned slowly, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes sunken into dark hollows. He had been dead for over a century, but there he was standing in the crypt, his ghostly form somehow still alive. His lips curled into a twisted grin as he took a step toward her. "You are here at last, Clara." His voice was a low rasp, like the sound of dead leaves scraping across the floor. "The bloodline always finds its way home." Clara backed away, her eyes wide with horror. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't real, you're dead. This is all in my mind." Elias chuckled, the sound reverberating through the crypt. "It is real, Clara. You are the last to fulfill the Crimson Doctrine, the last to shed your mortal shell, the last to ascend. No," Clara cried, stepping back toward the door, her pulse racing. "I won't do it. I won't let you." Before she could reach the door, the shadows of the crypt seemed to come alive, swirling around her, blocking her path. The walls pulsed with an unseen energy, and the temperature dropped to freezing. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind, drowning out everything else. "It's too late, Clara. The ceremony has already begun." Elias's voice came from all around her, filling the crypt with an overwhelming presence. "You cannot escape. The bloodline will claim you." Clara's body trembled as she realized the truth. She wasn't just fighting against Elias. She was fighting against the house, the bloodline, her own destiny. She could feel it now, deep within her veins, the pull of the transformation, the suffocating weight of the Crimson Doctrine. But Clara refused to give in. She had to destroy the book. She had to destroy the very essence of the bloodline's power. With a final desperate cry, Clara lunged toward the altar, knocking the book to the floor. She grabbed the first thing she could find, an old rusted candlestick, and smashed it against the altar. The crypt shook violently, and the walls seemed to scream as the book crumbled into dust. The shadows recoiled, the whispers fading into nothingness. But just as Clara thought she had won, the ground beneath her feet gave way. She fell into darkness.